everybody. Welcome once again to another installment of A Rebel Without a Clause, the Bill Callinson podcast, coming to you, as I always do, from these little four walls, my nutshell of infinite space. By that, I mean my television studio apartment right here in the Wood of the Holly, under the sign, right here in this creative cradle known as Crotona, which overlooks the COVID-addled but still somehow enchanted land of law. And today I have, a very special guest. She sits at the pillar of state power in Sacramento. She's one of our most important officers, and she's with me on the other side of this little digital thread. And she is the Right and Honorable Betty Yee. She is Madam Controller of the State of California. And welcome, Madam Controller Betty Yee, to this podcast. What a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Bill, and I hope you'll call me Betty for the rest of the session.
Okay, well, I wanted to get it right. We had a little bit of a kerfuffle with the Madam Vice President's wife, and her doctor status was assaulted unfairly, and I didn't want to step into that trap at all.
No, I appreciate that.
So let's just get it started right away. Who and what beside your husband do you actually control? That's my opening question.
You're going to get me in trouble, Bill. I do not control my husband.
Oh, okay.
But it is, I am the Chief Fiscal Officer for the state of California. And what I do is I'm the independent, I'm the person that provides independent oversight of the state's finances to be sure that all the taxpayer dollars are being directed to their rightful, lawful places.
Mm-hmm.
Ensure that the state is operating with very strong internal financial controls. And I'm the independent auditor for the state of California. Every bill that gets paid by the state of California has to come under the microscope of my team, my Green Eye Shade team, which is a great team. And we handle millions of disbursements every year. So we pay the bills for California. I monitor the cash that comes into the state to be sure we have enough to do that, to honor all of our obligations. I also administer the Unclaimed Property Program. And if I could make a plug, I am holding on to about $8 billion in property that does not belong to the state of California. These are properties that have been turned over by companies who are unable to locate their rightful owners. And if they're unable to locate them after a 3-year period of trying to find these owners, these companies are compelled to turn over the property to California. These are abandoned bank accounts. Maybe you moved, forgot you had a savings account. It may be a utility deposit you forgot you had, tax refund checks uncashed, and the like. So claimit.ca.gov, that's where all of this property is listed in the public database, and hope that the listeners will just visit that site to see if they have any property that belongs to them.
So you could actually go on that site and see, oh, wait, I have 40 acres outside of Fresno I never knew about. You could look and search for stuff, or you...
Right. If it got turned over to the state for some reason because the company couldn't locate you, I should be able to. I should be holding that property. I should mention it does not include real property though, so that would have to be probably through your county assessor.
Now, real property, that wouldn't mean like my laptop or a stereo. What would be?
No, we're talking about homes, land, dwellings, that kind of thing. So real estate.
And is there a statute of limitations on that? So somebody who's...
No. I hold that property in perpetuity and until we find the owners, and we utilize social media. We have all 120 members of our legislature doing outreach in their districts to try to help locate owners. And this is every property has a story. It's not just cash accounts, but it could be family heirlooms. It could be savings bonds in safe deposit boxes that were not redeemed. So it just runs the gamut of different types of property.
No, I was wondering about the Owens Valley and all the land that was swiped by the Los Angeles DWP. That's not in your database, I guess.
No, that is not in our database. I bet they flip a bundle. Exactly.
No, that's interesting. So when people vote for a controller, I know you sit on a lot of chairs. You're the, the Board of Equalization and the franchise tax boards, the land commissions. You're all over the place. Are those constitutional, state constitutional provisions that if you're controller, you get on those boards, or is that just how the jobs sort of expanded over the decades?
So the only constitutional provision of my membership on a board is the State Board of Equalization, which was established in the state constitution, I want to say around 1878. So I am one of the 5 members on that board.
Hmm.
And we are responsible for uniform assessment of real property. So we work with the county assessors in all 58 counties to be sure that is the case. But all of my other policy boards are by virtue of state law
Okay.
that enumerates the membership of each of those commissions or boards.
Now, here's another silly question, but it's been bugging me. Your name is on those state checks. Is that
I
correct?
was going to say, yes, I'm also responsible for issuing payroll for just about 280,000 state employees and employees of the California State University system.
Now, if I knew that my signature was going to be on so many checks, I would be practicing it, for years. And I was wondering, well, someday I want to be the state controller, so I got to start working on my signature. Was that something that you thought about ever? I mean, it must have crossed your mind.
I never thought about it, but I will tell you, in my first week of office, I was essentially told clean up that penmanship so people could see who's signing the check. So I have a signature that's actually quite legible.
Right, and you have the benefit of only having one syllable and 3 letters in your last name. Is that
There we
correct?
go. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so that wasn't part of your long preparation to
Yeah.
get where you are today. Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
here's another sort of institutional question I have for you about this controller. You're elected, you're on the ballot as an individual. You're not technically part of, let's say, Gavin's administration or the governor's
No.
administration.
No, I'm an independent constitutional officer, so I'm not part of the administration. We do work fairly closely with the administration, but no, I actually exercise a lot of my authority independently, which is why I'm the independent auditor for the state of California. I get to do my financial oversight of the state's dollars independently, and so my authority comes from state law, separate and apart from the other constitutional officers.
So you served with Governor Brown and now Governor Newsom, but it could have been just as easily a Republican governor and maybe somebody with a totally different set of priorities and policy objectives. Do you have any institutional power to either support or thwart those ambitions if, for example, you had somebody with a different view?
What I do is I try to be independent in terms of how I evaluate different types of ideas coming out of any governor's office, and that's what my independence accords me, and so I will do that. And what I have in mind when I exercise that judgment is what's good for California's economy, what's good for the people of California, and looking at being sure that we are maintaining fiscal integrity throughout all of that. So I would say that it's probably more of a bully pulpit type venue that from which I exercise that judgment, but it is something that I have the ability to do.
And one last constitutional question. If, for example, you were to see some malfeasance or corruption or violation of law within, your purview, what powers of enforcement do you have? Do you call the California Highway Patrol? How the Attorney General? How does that work in a hypothetical example?
So as we do our audits, if we do detect any kind of malfeasance or anything untoward from a legal perspective, we do make referrals to either the county district attorneys and or the Attorney General's office. You're right, Bill. I don't have any enforcement authority, but those entities do.
I see. And speaking of Attorney Generals, California, there's been a little bit of, the former California Attorney General is now a U.S. Senator and soon to be a Vice President. So the big political shuffleboard in Sacramento is moving, even with the Attorney General you just mentioned. He's going, Xavier goes to Washington as well. So it looks like the little chessboard of California politics is going to see some movement in the next, I imagine, few weeks. Those vacancies will have to be filled.
There's a lot of fluidity right now. The Governor Newsom will, as you just mentioned, Bill, will be appointing a successor to Vice President-elect Kamala Harris after she is sworn into office and vacates the Senate seat.
Mm-hmm.
And then Javier Becerra, our current Attorney General, has been appointed by President-elect Biden to head up to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and so there will be a lot of movement. Now, I know that Attorney General Becerra will need to be confirmed by the Senate, so the
Right.
appointment for the Attorney General may not happen right away because he will not be vacating the office until he's actually confirmed.
And is the governor obligated to, well, can he make that announcement before that it's vacated or before he's confirmed?
I'm not sure of the sequence of events, and in terms of whether the Attorney General can begin his duties as the Secretary before he's confirmed. I'm not aware of what the federal requirements are.
How that works. Well, I think the big question for a lot of people is, okay, who's going to get the balance of Kamala's term? And
right.
He's kept his cards pretty face down, I think, on that one.
It's going to be a tough decision. I mean, the one thing that I'm happy about is that there's an abundance of talent, talent in California. There is also, I think, as the governor's been hearing, as we've been reading about, just a huge outcry for being sure that our communities of color are represented. Senator Harris, Vice President-elect Harris is being African American and being the first Asian and being an Asian woman as well in the U.S. Senate, there's been a huge level of support to appoint a woman of color, and particularly a Black woman, to succeed her. So we'll see what the governor does. I know he's been, he has relationships with a lot of people. The Latino community certainly has been forthcoming about our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, as a candidate. So it's a tough decision for the governor, but it's also, I think, on the positive side. As I said, we have just an abundance of talent from which he can tap.
One of those talented people might even be Betty Yee. I imagine you're on that chessboard too on some level.
It's a big chessboard, just by virtue of being in statewide office. I think I've landed a place there. I don't know if that will rise to the top, but certainly if I'm considered, I would be honored to be considered, and certainly honored to serve as well. And I think the policy experience I bring, just with having worked in so many issues for a long time, I certainly can bring to Washington. So but we will cross that bridge when we get there.
Right now, I'm thinking for Kamala's seat, I think that comes due in 2 years.
Yes, it's a 6-year term. She was elected in 2016.
Right.
And so it will be up in 2022.
So that person, whoever that is probably going to have to think very seriously right away if they're going to make a run for the Senate in 2 years. And they're going to have to start thinking about that really very quickly. I'm not a big prognosticator, but Adam Schiff is near me. He's actually my congressman, and his profile really took a leap in the last 4 years, and deservedly so. And then, of course, Karen Bass, who's, I think, congresswoman adjacent to where I live. She also, I think, comes highly recommended, and she was on a list to be perhaps a vice president, a nominee. So it's going to be interesting, which brings another question I've been thinking about, and that's just the identity politics. And we've seen historically where that might have backfired. For example, to me, just off the top of my head, Clarence Thomas was an example. I think he got Thurgood Marshall's seat on the Supreme Court, and he fulfilled the sort of identity vacuum, but he didn't fulfill the policy vacuum. Sometimes those folks can be Trojan horses. So I'm not suspicious of identity politics, but I think there's just a level of caution I think they can be used to kind of betray the intent of I think you understand what I'm talking about there.
I do. I think it's a double-edged sword. It can be. And your Clarence Thomas example is a great one to illustrate that. And there is a part of me, being an Asian woman, a woman of color, who takes some issue with the identity taking such primacy when we know that there's plenty of talent and experience that comes from our communities of color. And I hope that the shift and the pivot can happen very quickly about once someone is identified. And you have to immediately you're identifying with respect to just what community they're from, but that the pivot can happen quickly in terms of what they bring to the table.
Right.
And that's something I hope continues to be important. I think all of the names that are mentioned as possible candidates for the governor's appointment all have different kinds of experience, all good experience to bring to the table. And I just don't want us to sell ourselves short just because we have to be from a community of color or a minority community when in fact we're just as qualified to serve as anybody else.
Absolutely. And your story is an interesting one. I know it in sort of vague detail. You're a daughter of immigrants from I don't know the province, but from China, and you're and Talk about that a little bit in your journey, because you and I shared, we were actually at Berkeley at the same time. So we clearly must have walked, at least maybe we were in a class together, or although I didn't take any
Maybe.
accounting classes, I was in the drama department and literature and theater and all that stuff. You might have been over in the sociology building, wherever the hell that was. But we've,
Yeah, Bernal Hall, right? Exactly.
yeah, we probably crossed paths. And
Probably in Dwinell Hall, we probably crossed paths or
that's
something.
right, or at the registration office. So we shared those very interesting 4 years at UC Berkeley. I guess I'm diverting, but that was a pretty critical moment. And we were just speaking earlier about how
Yeah,
different it was then. We were in the, I guess, the shadow of the free speech movement. The 60s were not long removed. I do have a recollection that the year before I went to Berkeley, Patty Hearst was abducted like 2 blocks
right.
from my dorm. So it was a totally different social moment. What was it like for you at Berkeley?
It was a wonderful experience. Although I did not live on campus, my fond memories of Berkeley, my time there was just the exposure I had to people from every part of the world. And I remember that so vividly because, growing up in San Francisco and really my upbringing was on the west side of San Francisco, where it was mostly, kind of an Irish Catholic, European Catholic neighborhood. And, to be exposed to, people from, Asia and Africa and South America and just getting more global perspectives about things. I will never forget that experience, and so I enjoyed my studies tremendously at Berkeley. I also feel like that those were my formative years in terms of people always ask me, what did you learn at Cal? I said I learned how to live life. It really was about just understanding our place in the world and really where the world felt very, very small because we just connected with so many people who gravitated towards Cal from different parts of the world.
Yeah, how to live life. I tried to get into that class. I couldn't get in. It was always filled up. I never registered in time. So I've still not learned. It's still I wonder if they teach that, if you can get that online now. I'm still,
I think you're living it, Bill.
okay.
You may have missed the class, but you're living it.
Now, how did you get the thought? Your family was in the, I guess, a dry cleaning business. Was that the
Yeah,
family business? Which, I mean, I don't know if that's a stereotype, but I don't even know, how did Chinese people and families, did they gravitate to that profession? Why were so
yeah,
many, um,
absolutely.
I mean, how does that happen? I'm just curious.
Yeah. My parents, both my parents, my mom and dad are from Guangdong province in south eastern China.
Hmm.
And they were in a prearranged marriage. My dad came over to the United States very young age with very little money in his pocket because his family essentially told him, in order for you to provide for your future bride and family, there's no opportunity here. It was an agricultural community, rice paddies, peanuts, not very just very rural and agrarian. And so they really encouraged him to leave and to form a life in the United States. And, back in the village, the United States was known as Gimsan, which means Gold Mountain.
Hmm.
It was the land of opportunity. And so my godfather at the time had already come to San Francisco and essentially sponsored my dad over at the time. And he apprenticed in the laundry business in San Francisco, Chinatown. And at the time that he came to the United States, for someone, many people, many men like him, who saw no opportunities in China, had no, really high levels of educational attainment, certainly no English language proficiency. And so the choices were very, very limited. He could learn the laundry business, he could work in the grocery store business, or the restaurant business,
Hmm.
and those were pretty much the three options. He decided to apprentice in the laundry business in San Francisco, Chinatown, and eventually was able to open up his own laundry and dry cleaning business on the west side of San Francisco. But my father's path to citizenship was really through his enlistment in the United States Army when he served in active duty during World War II.
Oh.
And this is another kind of a point in history where there were many Chinese American veterans whose path towards becoming just fully integrated into American society was through their service in the war.
So it wasn't necessarily precipitated by the rise of Mao Zedong in late 1948 and the revolutionary aspect there. It wasn't. He
Yeah.
had came prior to that to the
He
United
came
States.
prior to that. My mother was actually still there at the time, and so they had they had my older sister, who's 8 years older than I am, was born in China.
Oh,
My
wow.
mother left in the early 50s, right after the communists took over, and was able to escape China or leave China. Giving up everything she owned, with the exception of my sister and my grandfather, my father's father, and left to live in Hong Kong with my aunt. And from there, she came over to the United States the year before I was born in 1956. So this was I mean, it's something that you think about. I mean, it sounds like something out of a movie, but this is a pretty common experience, pretty common immigrant experience for
Yes.
many Chinese Americans.
So when you mentioned that your parents, their relationship was prearranged, was it prearranged before your mother followed your father to America? Did she know that there was a husband waiting for her in California?
Yes, yes. After my father left his family, my mother moved in with his family. So it was prearranged. She was essentially now part of his family, and so this was prearranged at a very, very young age. I remember, my
That's
mother's
hilarious.
97. My mother's still, my father's deceased. My mother's still alive. She's 97 years old, and bless her heart, still, just her spirits are good, in declining health. But she is, we've been taking care of some of her affairs, and I recently came upon her marriage certificate to my father, and at the young age of, I think she was 23 when she wed. My father's occupation on the marriage certificate was merchant, and for my mother, her occupation was spinster. So at the
Was
young age of 23, spinster.
Oh, spinster. Okay. Oh my God. I didn't know you could. Is there a major for that in college? Majoring in spinsterhood. Well,
Spinster.
so she knew when she came to America that she had a husband already picked out, so she didn't have to land and get on the Tinder app
Yeah,
to find a
yeah.
husband. It was prearranged. It was
He was peer range, and then my father, as he was earning, whether it was paid during his enlistment in the army, was providing financially for her, and so this is the common story. I have met up with so many of my friends and colleagues who have similar experiences with their parents, and their way to seeking citizenship in this country was pretty much through military service.
wow. So I'm just trying to imagine young Betty in this dry cleaning store on the western perimeter of San Francisco, with Chinese probably spoken in your household, and you're going to Lowell High School, a very famous high school in San Francisco, as I recall.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how does you get that first thought, like government? I want to, like, how did that come to you? What was these ideas, where they form, in little private moments in your life? I'm kind of curious about that.
Sure, sure. I first had a taste of government, pretty full frontal, when I was actually representing four Chinese American families in the neighborhood. Now, remember, this was a mostly European neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Very few Chinese American families, probably no more than five families. So I was tasked by the Chinese American families to speak up on their behalf because the San Francisco Unified School District was going to start their busing program. My parents' laundry and dry cleaning business, and also where we live in the back of the laundry and dry cleaning business, was 2 blocks away from the local elementary school. My younger sister was going to be part of that first class to be bused. And so I was tasked to go before the local school board town hall. I was 13 years old at the time, and to give a statement on behalf of the parents. And the statement essentially went like this: We are in business for ourselves. Our businesses are open 6 to 7 days a week. We have a local elementary school here, and we're not opposed to the goals of the busing program. But should any emergency arise with our children, we would have to be on public transportation for well over 2 hours to pick them up and bring them home. None of us drive. So I made that statement at the age of 13, and went back to my seat, and the busing program lasted for the better part of the next 3 decades. And that experience, Bill, I have to tell you, just left such an impression in me that I was a voice for someone. and not just a voice for someone to anybody, but a voice to someone with a public agency, the school district.
So you were
And
not bused as a result of your advocacy. Is that what you're saying?
I was not bused, but my sister was. So our point of view was not did not prevail. So the busing program did happen, and my sister was bused, and as well as my other younger siblings, and it was fine. Nothing happened. There were no emergency arose during that time. But just the idea that I stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves because of the language barrier, and just how we do that in terms of making our views known to a governmental entity. That stayed with me, from 13 years old until now. And I think about that a lot when I look at so many of our emerging communities that sometimes are disproportionately affected by policies that we put into law, and how just so many of their voices we're not hearing clearly enough about the impacts that we are having, that they're experiencing through the policies that we enact. I'm very sensitive to that, just because I think for all of us in public life, as public officials, our job in terms of just being sure we're protecting a democracy is to really be sure that everybody has the opportunity to fully participate in it. And so I'm grateful for that experience when I was 13.
That's interesting because most people don't associate working in government with idealism. They associate it with bureaucracy.
Yes.
I can say personally, I grew up, well, we're of the same moment, went to
Uh-huh.
Berkeley the same time. There was Nixon and the Vietnam War was raging, and I was reading David Halberstam, all these things that influenced myself. I sort of became cynical about it all. I think you were once fortunate and way wiser than me, because I was sort of like, I don't know, Nixon, these guys, it's just turned me off a little bit.
No,
Y- y-
absolutely. No, those were not good chapters, in terms of the state of our democracy and government at the time. But I think what I've always just felt kind of a strong belief in, and much of this is really the lived experience of my parents. For them to be able to, for both my mother and my father to be able to come here to the United States to establish a small business. I mean, we grew up poor. There were 6 kids in the family.
Wow.
We grew up poor. We didn't have a lot. I translated for my parents in terms of the transactions with vendors, and did the banking, all the financial transactions, kind of keeping the books for the family business, which I now have the great opportunity to keep the books for the great state of California.
Yeah.
But this is, I'm just grateful for that opportunity. I mean, where else could we have had, the ability to be so supported, by a community where my father could set up a business, where we went to first-rate public schools. I was able to get into a first-rate university, and be able to now just do what I do. I mean, I just feel so grateful for that opportunity, and my commitment to my work is really about how do we make sure that opportunity is there for everybody.
Uh-huh.
The doors are kind of closing in on so many communities who I think are going to have a tougher time accessing the same kinds of experiences you and I had.
Well, let me ask you this. Will California have enough vaccines, and who's going to pay for it?
That's a great question. I think, well, I'm very hopeful that going into 2021, that we will see vaccines become more commonplace, and that we will be sure that everyone has access to it. Who's going to pay for it is that's a great question. I think this is something that with the incoming administration, with President-elect Biden, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, is going to be a priority in terms of just being sure that everyone has access to the vaccine. And I think if it means that government has to, really support a lot of that financially, I think that's what we have to do in terms of getting to the other side of this pandemic. And then of course, there's issues of equity around accessing the vaccine as well. And so I know that, and I'm very happy to see the priority for frontline healthcare workers, as it should be, as they're caring for those who are exposed to the virus, but we know that this virus has hit particularly communities of color very, very hard, and so I think there are going to be so many issues around this vaccine before we see full uptake of it. Certainly a lot of skepticism still, particularly in the Black community
Mm-hmm.
around vaccines. And so um, this is where I think to Vice President-elect's comments today, we have to work with communities. We have to really build that trust and hope that everyone understands that this is an essential part of how we get to the other side of this pandemic.
Do you see it as strictly a federal responsibility for the financing of this, or is that going to be shared with the states, or the states be funded by the Fed? How do you think that's going to shake out, or has it even been decided yet?
It's not been decided yet, but I would venture to say that it's going to be a federal-state partnership.
Mm-hmm. To my mind, if there's one thing that this virus has put into sharper focus about healthcare in America, is that it is at once a private right and a public responsibility, because an undocumented immigrant gardener can just as easily give the virus to the head of, Apple. It's
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, this is the nature of a pandemic. It knows no boundaries, when it comes to legal status or just ethnic identity. I mean, it is it's so universal that this is where the trust really needs to come in. Yeah, and I hope one of the great lessons coming out of this. I was just thinking about this, Bill, on the drive home to meet up with you tonight.
oh,
And that is, I hope, one of the great lessons as we look back to this time in history is that how we got through it is really having each of us recognize that we are essential to the other. We take care of ourselves, but by virtue of doing that, we are taking care of others. And so clearly that's true with our frontline healthcare workers, but just for each of us individually, we know what has to be done, and I hope that. This is how we're all going to, just make a commitment to get through this together, doing what we need to do.
yeah, to me, it sort of exposes the core tension in American life, which at once in the United States champions individualism and the right to go out and do your thing. And I did it on my
Yes.
own and I made my mark. And
Right.
also the collective, which is also a countervailing pressure, on our psyches in an American life. And this virus exposes the deficiencies in the first world view. My preference is there's a balance, but there's a tension too. And this virus, to me, exposes it, on many levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. The individual aspect and putting that up against what's for the common good, the collective good.
Right. And here's another question I have about the vaccine. You're looking at the balance sheet. Does California have the dough to deal with it?
Where we are actually, and this is where I believe it has to be a federal-state partnership. So, California, I have to really applaud our governor, who's been very, very aggressive about getting federal financial assistance. We currently, as dire as things are with our economy, I do have to say that, from a fiscal perspective, from a cash perspective, California is doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also exposing what we know has been true, and that is those who are, earning more are actually doing very well, and those who are not, particularly our low-wage service sector workers, are not. And so, who's generating the tax revenue? Those who are really part of the upper income earning community. So, but having said that, Governor Newsom's been very aggressive about getting federal financial assistance. Right when the pandemic hit, to get that major presidential emergency declaration, we got FEMA money right away, and it was really what allowed us to get through the early months of the pandemic. And I think he will continue to be aggressive, and certainly now with an administration that definitely understands the urgency of what needs to be done. I think we'll have more receptivity with the new administration coming in.
Well, that's hopeful. It's been a a navigational struggle, I imagine, for this between this dance between the California and the federal government. I'm so glad that Biden prevailed. I in my podcast, I had a great opportunity. I was in Iowa covering the political scrum there, driving across the snow-scaped Midwest, and I was particularly impressed by Pete Buttigieg. I saw him in Council Bluffs, Iowa, in a little hall, and I said, this guy, he should do podcasts. There's no pausing. He doesn't have any pauses. I've never seen the guy even just any moment to kind of reach for a thought. It's like everything he says seems totally prepared, including today, his speech. The guy is just massively
Yes.
talented, as a political person. And then I had the unique opportunity to go to South Carolina, and I stood outside the most rural and African American precinct I could find, and I just interviewed folks as they came out. And at that moment, it was so clear to me that the African Americans saved democracy. That they, at that moment, on that day in, I guess, what was it, the very end of February, they stepped up and really rescued Biden's bacon. And I have really a great podcast interviewing these people as they came out, and they were so enthusiastic and so kind. And then I hustled down to Columbia and saw Clyburn introduce Biden, where he was on his way to the presidency, but it wasn't clear before that, at least to me at that moment. And
No, that was a very pivotal point for the campaign, for sure.
yeah. Now, I went through some of your old records in terms of your political outcomes, and you had a pretty interesting scuffle politically. Your first, I guess for you, it was in the primary, because your first run where there was a contested election and there, I guess, recounts before your situation was made clear. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I ran in my first term for controller in 2014. It was the first statewide election subject to the top two primary, meaning that the top two vote getters, regardless of political party, would advance to the general election. And I prevailed in that second place finish by 481 votes against the third place leader. And it was very tense. There was a recount, and the recount eventually was called off by one of my Democratic opponents. So I have to say it had a lot of people on pins and needles, but at the same time, I think we learned a lot about just how every vote counts. And so I don't think people are taking votes for granted after that experience.
Right. Now, was it fun campaigning and going to places where people maybe hadn't seen a woman like yourself, or people that didn't necessarily agree with you, or were driving through the Central Valley with the kind of the different worldview than San Francisco? What was that like? Was it fun?
I love campaigning. I'm just going to tell you that, Bill. I love campaigning. First of all, I love people. I think one of the things about campaigning that I particularly appreciate is that it does thrust you into situations that, probably I on my own would not have ever thought about getting into, going to places that I probably would not have chosen to go to meet people who are, different from me, to really understand the perspectives and the concerns of working people around this state. And so I have to say, I enjoy campaigning. I did a lot of it on the ground. I'm a grassroots activist at heart. And for any political consultant who thinks that winning a statewide election by driving over 250,000 miles in my Toyota Camry to meet people is the way to win, they scratch their heads. It's like, you've got to be kidding, and I'm not kidding. Being on the ground and just really having, whether it was an audience of 10 people to 400 people, you learn so much about just what are the top of mind issues for people. And there were two questions that I would always ask, and I particularly like going to places that I knew little about and meeting people with whom I have the least in common. And I will say this, and I still feel this way, even as contentious as things are politically today, we live in a very, very great state from a diversity standpoint. I just wish that we could be, more respectful of our differences and embrace that diversity a little bit more. But we really do live in a great state. But there were two questions that I would inevitably ask in any venue that just try to, one, give people a sense of what politics means. And for me, I think it is a little bit different. I look at politics and certainly, what I have done with when I was 13 years old, standing up for the Chinese American parents in my neighborhood. I would oftentimes talk about politics being about, standing up for people and really allowing people to have a voice. And so I would inevitably question just having people think about a time in their lives when they stood up for someone. And I now regret that I didn't have a way to chronicle just so many of the stories that I heard along the campaign trail. about just siblings standing up for one another, because one was being bullied at school,
Hmm.
for a teenager, standing up for a disabled parent, working in an agricultural plant. I
Hmm.
mean, just things like that that are so, these are lived experiences by Californians. And then the second question I would ask is, particularly with adults, is what are your aspirations for your children? And if you don't have children, just what's what gives you hope for the future? And again, I wish I had an ability to just memorialize what we heard. We all have just so much in common in terms of where we place our values and what our values are. I think we all really live our lives and try to do what we can to provide for our children, provide for our families, to leave the world a little bit of a better place. And I think sometimes the debate is really about how do we get there. And it was a phenomenal experience. And to this day, I still like campaigning. I'm not doing it a lot these days with the virtual reality of how we're connecting with people, but I do miss that. And there's just nothing like sitting across the table and just looking somebody in the eye and having a conversation like this. I loved it.
I'm sorry
Loved
we
it.
can't do it face to face, but we're doing it. Well, you probably have the chance to memorialize it in the future. I'm getting the vague sense that you might be running again for something in the future. As a matter of fact, I also noted that you are now running for the vice chair of the California Democratic Party. Is that still?
I am. I am. Yes, yes. So this is an election that will take place at the state party convention next April. It is
Okay.
not a public campaign, but it's certainly a campaign within the party. As I said, I've been a grassroots activist all my life. I've been a lifelong Democrat, and I've been a little disturbed by really all political parties in terms of how. Just our platforms and how we're, deciding to place our resources, what we make our priority issues, not really speaking as much to the experiences that Californians are facing. And this is an unusual time. I grant you that. We're at the confluence of a global public health pandemic. We are still trying to dig ourselves out of a recession. We see, this welcome growing outcry for, racial equity and justice, and we also are know part of the state is spared now from experiencing the impacts of climate change. And so you put all of this together, and I begin to see how, as we're all trying to think about how we're going to rebuild our economy after the pandemic and the recession, that it can't be business as usual anymore, and that we have to be informed by what people's experiences are. And I've been particularly spending a lot of time with communities of color, those who typically are not at the decision-making tables, to just understand what their experiences are like, and
Hmm.
what works for them. I do think that we've had public policy that has been well-intentioned, but have not really had the kind of impact that we hope they would have. And so that has driven, inequality, wider. And, from an equity perspective, it's why we are seeing, this growing outcry for racial and economic justice and equity.
Now, isn't it a little bit unusual for a statewide office holder to pursue that kind of a job within the party mechanisms? Is that?
It is. It is. It is. And the reason I wanted to do is because I feel, I'm not a legislator. I do hold statewide office. I think that, part of this is also about how we build a system of accountability, about how we prioritize some of these issues, so that whether I, as a statewide official, or our members of the legislature, begin to respond to some of the really urgent needs of Californians. And the Democratic Party, which I love, my roots are in the party. We've been a party that's about a big tent party. We welcome everyone. We're diverse. We have a broad platform. But I think one of the downsides of that is that, we are about a lot of things. And at the end of the day, what are we delivering on? Are we delivering, really with intention about how we, lift up communities? And I think that's been missing for me. And, I see the same impacts over and over again when I look at funding decisions. I see the same impacts over and over again when I look at laws being passed, and just how so many communities are being passed up, and not being taken seriously about just some of the shortcomings in their lives. And so when we rebuild, I hope that this is about rebuilding where we're not leaving any community behind, and that the Democratic Party, being the party that is inclusive, can really be embracive of some of the strategies, whether it be in policymaking or in representative government that embraces that inclusion.
The Democratic Party within California enjoys a very overwhelming majority. We're not attended to by national elections because the results are basically a foregone conclusion.
Right.
There's some dangers. I remember, I don't remember, but Texas, for example, was solid Democratic, and then that splintered over racial issues.
Right.
It's not preordained that the Democratic Party will maintain a kind of monopoly on the state politics that it enjoys now. I guess there are risks when the divisions start to show themselves within the party as opposed to outside of the party.
I think the divisions have to do with, how broad or how narrow is our focus going to be. And all I really am after is that we focus on how we deliver results for people and how we can, lift up the communities that really need our help. And, I'm constantly thinking about, how government can continue to be there for people in need. And when I see particularly victims of wildfires who a year after they've lost their homes still be in quite dire situations, that's a failure to me. So how do we do better with respect to those people? And so in some ways it's not even about kind of being Democrat. It's about just how do we serve people and really elevate their own kind of confidence in government and their trust in government, that we are there for them. And so and as a Democratic Party, I mean, if we go that I one will do this, I think it really benefits us to go into areas where the party hasn't gone. I mean, I think for any political party, they tend to go where you have a concentration of voters and where you can raise money. There are many communities where neither of that exists, and yet at the same time, when you talk about how we're going to rebuild an economy, they should be very much a part of the conversation, and they should not be left behind. And this is something I feel very, very strongly about, and it's one of the things I think was one of the biggest lessons I learned traveling the state is that from a values perspective, we're not all that different. We really aren't. And I think if we can keep the conversation there and particularly focus on just what the real needs and lived experiences of people are now, that we actually can rebuild with much more strength and certainly being more inclusive in terms of the opportunities that we're bringing to people.
Well, I know you split your time between Sacramento and I believe Alameda, so you had a big whiff of the fires in the early fall and end of the summer, and
yes.
That was pretty brutal. I'll tell you one area that I find frustrating, and you can speak to it, is the initiative process in California, where we send these folks to Sacramento to make the rules and pass the laws, and then in many cases they do pass rules and make laws. I'm just going to use as a specific example the labor protections for gig workers like Uber drivers and Door Dashers and this new sort of sector of work in our world. And then all of a sudden there's an initiative, and it basically, I don't know if it overruled the legislature, but it certainly tried to. And those protections were slipped. I don't know what would prevail in the courts ultimately. I'm not sure about that. But in a state that's supposedly progressive, some of the sort of anti-progressive sentiments get revealed in the initiative process, if not through the actual elections of individuals.
No, that's exactly right. It is frustrating. It is frustrating from the perspective of how so many of these initiatives are just so difficult to comprehend by the average voter. To expect that voters are going to be able to really understand the full impact of what they're voting on is, I think, a little unrealistic. I think when you have the ability to raise so much money to fight an initiative or to support an initiative that you can pretty much message however you want to message, is not really great for our democracy. I mean, I think we do elect our representatives to the legislature. That's where things should be deliberated. I think the process, and it's been limited during this COVID crisis, but I know in my years working in the state capitol that I always consider that the people's building, and to be able to have robust policy hearings and to have anyone of the public be able to come in and express their views on a bill is really how all of this should work. But the initiative process is challenging. It is one. It can serve as a mechanism for referendum against laws that are passed by the legislature, and then it can also be a venue by which other interests can get something onto the ballot if the legislature becomes too much of a hurdle to be able to enact such laws. I know there have been reforms that have been proposed to the initiative process. Many of them have run up against constitutionality issues, and
Hmm.
so I think it's here to stay. But I do think there could be a more robust process that really, I spent so much time this election bill just educating voters about the measures.
I did too,
Um,
and I don't have a job in the
right?
government. Yeah.
Right. I mean, just what a yes vote would mean, what a no vote would mean, and I didn't even put in my 2 cents about how I would vote on it, but just trying to explain what the voter guide was trying to tell voters, and we need more of that. And I know for young voters especially, had a lot of requests to just try to help navigate that for them.
Yeah, it's very challenging. Well, Betty, you're doing the great work, and what I find most impressive about you is I'm getting to know you for the first time here, is that how you've managed to channel your idealism into government service. That was an ideal that I felt was sort of emblematic of John F. Kennedy, and maybe just an earlier moment of the young children who were at the lunch counters with James Lawson in 1960.
Yeah.
So I want to first just thank you for this conversation. I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail again, knowing how much you enjoy it. I'm trying to think, what's the next election cycle? Well, I guess it's 2 years, so maybe we'll see you out there. Your term limited out, so what? Let's see, where are you? You're in your second term, and
Yes.
when do you come due? Let's see.
I will be termed out in 2022, and at this point, I'm really focused on just being a part of the party leadership. I'm a little worried about the 2022 elections coming up with respect to the national elections and
Hmm.
our congressional races, and I think this is a pivotal time when I'm certainly joining in the celebration of a change in Washington and administration coming in. But this is a time when we are seeing a lot of division. And I think, how we can heal some of that division, and government has a big role to play in that, and certainly the parties as well, in terms of where we place our energy and electing good people to serve and really prioritizing the issues that we care about, particularly economic and equity issues, racial equity issues, and I think if we can just focus on how we deliver, and that is going to be my focus. There's so many communities just really going without, and I'll just end by saying this, Bill. It's I get so inspired by people who for the life of me, don't know how they wake up each day feeling any sense of hope.
Mm.
Um, because they really have very little resources. The opportunities aren't plentiful in their communities. They're trying to raise families, and they work hard. Sometimes multiple jobs, and particularly now, many of them don't have a choice but to work, and increasing their exposure to COVID. So these are the realities and the experiences of Californians, and I just hope the choices that some of these Californians have the opportunity to make in the future aren't so dire and don't put them in harm's way. And I think that's really the charge of what I'd like to see government really elevate our focus to really protect our Californians, and then for the party to also prioritize that as well. So I'm grateful for the work that I get to do, and I'm just really excited that hopefully we're going to be turning a page. I'm hopeful. You always have to stay hopeful,
Yes.
but also, I'm very grounded in the reality that we are living in a very divided time right now. And the only way I know how to bridge that divide is just to be, just straightforward, and to really understand, what people's needs are at this time. But never giving up the thought. And what I've learned is that, I think as Californians, we all do share some really common values. And I think for a diverse state like California, we also share a lot of common experiences as well. So I'm up for the challenge, and I just really appreciate your giving voice to so much of what's happening, both at all levels, because I think as people hear about people like James Lawson, who whose history has just shown us, just what's possible.
Mm.
And um, and I think how we've been able to take this time, and I always try to look at the positive. During this time when we're dealing with the outcry for racial and economic equity, I've been doing a lot of reading and really understanding just where we have not fulfilled our promises. With respect to opportunities, particularly for Black Americans. And so we need to do better. And I hope that will be our guiding lesson to how we do better.
Well, you are sitting where the rubber meets the road in government, signing those checks to people. So we'll be seeing that signature. And I expect to see you on the campaign trail. You from the controller's office. Alan Cranston did pretty well from the controller's office. He found his way to the U.S. Senate. And of course, you know him. Gray Davis was also a controller, and then he also became governor. So I'm feeling that we're going to hear more from Betty Yee, and you'll be, have a chance to do what you love, which is campaign, and then also just make this big machinery, this unwieldy bureaucracy work for people. You've given me hope talking to you. What can I say? I still think it's a privilege to be here for this incredible moment in history that we're living in. It's an inflection point. We're seeing just all the deep historical currents in America going back to the Civil War resurfacing, right in front of our eyes. For someone like me, it's like, wow, it's all happening again, and I'm here, and I can see it and talk about it. So, and it's what out-of-work stand-up comedians do when you can't go in clubs. So that's what I'm about. So, Betty, what a pleasure to talk to you. Any final thoughts? You're very eloquent and articulate, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. And I think I know a little bit more about the state controller and the chairs and all the equalization and the franchise with the taxes, the whole thing. You're sitting there right in the center of it, making it work.
It's a great privilege to serve the state, and thank you, Bill, and just keep shining the light on us. I mean, I think this is this should not be a mystery in terms of the work that I do, the work that any public official does, and our job really is just how do we connect better. And so that's my commitment, and that's what I will be continuing to do.
Well, Thank you, Betty. I can't wait to meet you in person. In regards to you-know-who, and I look forward to meeting you and doing this again at a later date. And best of luck and good health, and stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you later. Thank you so much, Betty. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
So there you have it, folks. The Honorable Betty Yee, the state controller for the state of California. She's making it all work. I hope you got a little insight into someone really in the inside. There's a lot to talk about. I could have spoken with her for hours, but it'll have to do. So till next time, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean, well, Namashaloha.